going. Hello, this is Dr. Jason Munsell. It is Thursday, March 31st, the very last day of March, and it is about 1:02 and 35, 36, 37 seconds. This is the little lecture I promised you on Chapter 9. This is going to be a horrible lecture. It's going to be a failure. Because and again, failure. It's all about failing. So I put the little PowerPoint on Casey just a second ago, and I'm not sure if you're able to see this or not. Sort of can. I can. So, going to school to learn how to fail. So this is what this chapter is all about. My beard is getting big. I'm just letting it grow. I'm just like, this hurt. What do I have in here? It's a weeble wobble. What else? What else do I have in here? Oh, it's a lightsaber. Damn it. The Force will be strong with this lecture. Or is this is the evil one, isn't it? I don't know. My wife got it for me for a Christmas present. Sort of a gag gift. Failure. Failure. I have to learn from my failure. How do I get this thing back in this little house? Bastards. I broke it. Success. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Preface. This is the second slide. Make effective presentations using awesome backgrounds. Engage your audience. Capture audience attention. Oh crap. That was from the original template that I got online for free. Fail. That's not part of our lesson. Okay. Next slide. I failed today. I'm trying not to drink Diet Coke anymore, but I'm drinking Diet Coke. Fail. Don't be NASA. This is a picture from Challenger, but it's really interesting. This first bit of Chapter 9. It talks about NASA, and it talks about a book that I have not read, but it looks like a really interesting book by Philip Tompkins, Apollo, Challenger, and Columbia, The Decline of the Space Program. And it talks about how the organizational culture was such that they really did not learn from the Challenger. And yeah, this is Columbia, the picture of Columbia disintegrating as it came back into the atmosphere. A culture emerged that was less sensitive to safety and much more concerned with bureaucratic procedures and financial matters. This quote is really important, I think, because it also says a lot about why people learn to fail or don't learn, something like that. We saw that a culture can divide into two antagonistic cultures, two warring tribes with a cultural fence between them. In this case, the managerial bureaucratic subculture and the weakened engineering conservative one. We watched a reversal of status as the engineers became second-class members, forced to communicate through the formal channels, intimidated by the managers. The informal system communication can no longer save the formal system. So that was an example where the whole culture was screwed up. They did not learn from the Challenger. In fact, things got worse. They were not listening to the engineers, and there was also groupthink. If you ever heard anything about groupthink, where nobody wants to rock the boat. And so then they have the Columbia, and I'm sure unless they have changed things, we'll probably see other examples of NASA sort of screwing things up. But basically, the larger idea and the whole point of this chapter is that organizations are going to make mistakes. There are going to be failures, but we need to learn from the failures. And NASA is a classic example of folks who did not learn from the failures. And so the first section here is failing to learn. There's a lot of various organizations like NASA that simply fail to learn from their failures. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail, I think. And so the first thing it says is don't drink and drive, which is very, very important. But basically the idea here is that we all make mistakes. We all make personal mistakes. I have not, never made a mistake before that. Look what else came out of my beard. Ooh, it's a hog hat. Go Hogs. What else can I do? Random thing. There's a mouse. In any case, so behavior can only change when the individual chooses to learn from an event. So you got to choose to learn. Organizations the same way. You got to strategically and intentionally choose to learn from the mistake. Choose to learn from the failure. So that can be complicated because, as Bazerman and Watkins contend, when organizations fail to learn from failures, they become vulnerable to predictable surprises. And organizations are obviously highly complex systems, a little more complex than just us individually. But the two big ideas here are predictable surprises and unpredictable surprises. Which predictable surprises sort of oxymoronical, is that a word? It's oxymoron. But it's all these ideas about how, we probably should have saw this coming. We could predict the Tennessee Valley Authority. Schwann's to some extent. So, think about all NASA. Think about all these things where, we probably knew this was coming down the pipeline, but we didn't do much to mess with it. And those are predictable surprises. And then we have unpredictable surprises that are truly, we didn't see this coming. So what we need to do basically is to, learn from our failures and predict the surprises. But there are 4 ways in which organizations actually fail to learn from the failures that they have had. One way that people fail to learn is scanning failures. Basically, you don't pay very close attention to potential problems, both inside and outside the organization. When you email me, I don't actually read it. I just scan it. That's a joke, but so you don't really pay close attention, and so simple inattention to something can, like Tennessee Valley Authority or whatever. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry. I'll be happy. Integration failure is failure to understand how pieces of potentially complicated information fit together, so you haven't put the pieces of the puzzle together. Incentive failures. This is huge, by the way, I think. Failure to provide sufficient rewards to people who report problems and take actions to avoid possible crises. People don't like people who rock the boat. We've got to have people who rock the boat. We've got to have whistleblowers because they help. But people tend to frown on whistleblowers. People tend to frown on other people saying, "Hey, we've got a big problem here." That was one of the major problems with NASA. People were scared, or the culture was you just didn't say much. If there's a problem, that's a huge bit of failing to learn from failure. And then learning failure is failure to draw important lessons from a crisis and preserve their memories in the organization. So again, some pretty interesting things from Bazerman and Watkins, the different ways in which organizations fail to learn from their failure. And then they talk about the example of Johnson & Johnson, which throughout the book, they've our authors here, Ulmer, Selnow, Seeger, sort of paraded them throughout various chapters as sort of champions of effective crisis management and all that type of stuff. But they have messed up. They talked about Tylenol poisoning and stuff like that. Some of the past stuff were caused by criminals. And so in recent years, they say, this is the paragraph on the bottom, page 187, Johnson & Johnson has been far less effective in its crisis management. The past decade, Johnson & Johnson has faced several crises resulting from predictable surprises. Overdose problems in children, Tylenol has been associated with liver damage, and they have been slow. And part of that is they say that they've been so successful. It's a failure of success. They were so successful in dealing with failures that were caused by criminals when failure was caused by their own inattention to things. They didn't do too well with it. So long story short, organizations fail to learn from failure, and that is bad. So what we want to do is to learn from our failure, and that is the next section, learning from failure. Oops, there you go. Don't go into the cave. So they have this little interesting thing about risk and folks, kids going into the caves and dying in Minnesota. We got lots of stuff going on here, but basically, and this is a huge problem with our entire society. We don't oftentimes learn. There's so many predictable surprises. My dad, I grew up sort of on a college campus, so my dad was a college professor, and there was this big sort of pedestrian crosswalk or whatever on the busy intersection, and he always said, well, why don't they put a pedestrian bridge here? It makes so much sense. The car zoomed by, somebody's going to get killed. This is what happens in our world. Nobody puts up a pedestrian bridge until somebody actually gets killed. Nobody puts up a stop sign or a railroad crossing until somebody dies. But we can predict that. That's a problem. We have to learn painful lessons apparently to do something that seems to be common sense. But sometimes that common sense is not common sense because common sense costs money. Nobody wants to build the bridge. I don't want to pay for it. I don't want to raise taxes. Our roads are fine. Yay. In any case, so basically, we want to make sure that we learn through failure. And so this example from Minnesota, they say that organizational learning can function much the same way. And there's a lot of different ideas about how organizations can indeed look at their failures, even minor failures or mistakes, and learn from them. There's a really important idea here, though, I think from Vail, that talks about some failures accumulate and create these larger crises, but we can't be mindless about them. So I think trained mindlessness on the top of page 189 is a very important concept, a barrier to recognizing warning signals caused by focusing only on expected outcomes. So we want to make this much money, blah, 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 blah. We're not going to worry about, little, tainted, whatever. And so there's some really interesting ideas here. And the thing is, I say here, mistakes are fun, yay. But basically, there's always going to be mistakes, and there's always going to be disruptions, but we have to be mindful about them. We have to look at them. We can't just ignore them. We can't be mindless about them. The second paragraph here on page 189, a company that appears to operate free from disruption may simply be operating from an unrealistic and uninformed perspective. And so we need to focus on the disruptions. And then there's this stuff from Sitkin, and he has this idea of intelligent failures, which I think was pretty good. He describes this recognition of little small failures before they move to big old full-blown crises as sort of learning readiness. And so not all failures are equally effective in fostering good risk management, so we have to have intelligent failures, which means they result from thoughtfully planned actions.